I've lived with Aaron long enough to sense even the smallest shift in his breath, so when he suddenly started staying late at work, I felt it instantly. This was the same man who used to rush home just to sit beside me on the couch, claiming no paycheck was worth missing an evening together. But now, he walked through the door long after dark, acting like it was nothing. Something in our home felt off, almost like a picture frame tilting on the wall. You tell yourself it's nothing, but you can't look away. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just stress or a busy season, but the excuses came too easily, too rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in the car before walking in. Every late night stretched the space between us a little wider, and I felt it, this quiet ache behind my ribs, the kind that shows up when the person you love starts drifting somewhere you can't follow. Each unanswered question hung in the air heavier than the last, and every time I looked at him, I recognized him a little less. One night I couldn't take it anymore, so I asked directly if something was wrong. The look he gave me felt like a stranger had borrowed his face. He avoided my eyes, muttered something about a promotion, and told me to stop worrying. That tone cut straight through me. I felt small, dismissed, pushed out of a life I had built with him. And as he walked past me, I realized I was standing in the middle of my own living room feeling like an outsider. Something inside me whispered that this was only the beginning of a storm I couldn't yet name. After that night, everything Aaron did felt louder, even the small things. The way he kept his phone face down on the counter, how he silenced notifications with a swipe he thought I didn't notice. The quick, stiff smile when I asked how his day went. I tried to breathe through it, grounding myself with little routines like folding laundry or making tea, but even those ordinary moments felt wrong, like I was living beside someone who kept locking doors I didn't have keys to. And the worst part was pretending I didn't feel it. I kept replaying our early years together, wondering if I had missed something back then, some warning sign, some crack we never patched. We used to talk about everything, from bills to dreams to stupid inside jokes that made no sense to anyone but us. Now, every attempt at conversation felt like pushing against a wall he'd quietly built when I wasn't looking. I could hear the change in his voice, this tightness, as if honesty had suddenly become a burden. And each curt answer stung more than I wanted to admit. One evening, I watched him walk straight past me, heading to the shower without a word. The sound of the water hitting the tiles echoed through the house, sharp and cold. I stood there gripping the back of a chair, feeling this hollow space expanding inside me. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was scared. Scared of what I felt, scared of what I might discover, scared of losing the life I thought was solid. And deep down, a question formed that I wasn't ready to say out loud, not even to myself. Eventually, the weight of not knowing became heavier than the truth I was afraid to face. One night, while Aaron was lacing his shoes to leave for just a couple of hours, I asked again if everything was really all right at work. The way he froze mid-movement told me more than his words ever could. He didn't look at me, just gave this clipped, irritated sigh, like my concern was an inconvenience. In that moment, something inside me tightened. I felt myself shrinking and hardening at the same time. That's when fear began turning into suspicion. As he walked out the door, I stood there listening to the fading sound of his car engine. The house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I pressed a hand over my chest, trying to calm the restless thudding, but it didn't help. Questions swirled around me like cold air seeping under a door. Was he lying? Was he hiding something? Or was I losing my mind? I grabbed a blanket around my shoulders, but even that familiar softness couldn't warm the sense of distance that had settled between us. It felt like living with a shadow instead of a husband. That night, sitting at the edge of our bed, I realized I was starting to brace myself, like people do when they know a storm is coming but can't see it yet. I wasn't sure what I'd find if I kept digging, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending. My gut wouldn't let me. Something was shifting, not just in Aaron, but in me too. I just didn't know then that the truth waiting ahead would hit much harder than any suspicion my heart had whispered so far. And as I turned off the lamp, I sensed the real unraveling was only just beginning. I reached a point where keeping everything bottled up felt impossible. My chest ached with questions I couldn't answer, and the silence in my house had become too loud to bear. That's when I thought of Rose, the one person who had seen me through heartbreaks, illnesses, even my mother's passing. She'd always been my refuge, the friend who opened her door before I even knocked. So that afternoon, without planning it, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to her house. My hands were shaking the whole way, like my body already knew something my mind couldn't name yet. When she opened the door and saw my face, her whole expression softened. I didn't even sit down before the words tumbled out of me. I told her about the late nights, the vague explanations, the cold tone that didn't sound like Aaron anymore. My voice cracked in the middle, and suddenly I felt 12 years old again, scared of being left behind. Rose put a hand on my arm, steady and warm, and for a moment I let myself sink into that comfort. I needed that softness more than I realized. It felt like someone finally helping me carry a weight I'd been holding alone. But as I spoke, a strange mixture of anger and fear welled up inside me. I hated hearing myself sound so lost, so unsure. I asked Rose if she thought Aaron could be cheating, and the way her eyebrows pinched together hit me like a punch. She didn't hesitate, said no man who loved me would treat me this way, cheating or not. Her words stung, but they also woke something in me, a sense of dignity I'd been neglecting while waiting for Aaron to choose me again. Still, even with her certainty, I felt this uneasy flutter in my stomach, like the story wasn't as simple as she made it sound. Rose guided me to the couch, and the moment I sat down, everything inside me seemed to spill over. I told her how every night felt like waiting for someone who no longer existed. How I'd lie awake listening for Aaron's car, praying the sound would bring relief instead of dread. My voice trembled, and I could feel the sting behind my eyes before the tears even formed. Rose watched me with this mix of concern and frustration, like she hated seeing me break over a man who didn't appreciate what he had. And for a second, I wished I could borrow her strength. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She never did. She told me straight that Aaron's behavior wasn't normal, wasn't respectful, wasn't loving. Her voice was firm, almost sharp, as if she needed to shake some sense back into me, and I felt small hearing it, like I'd let myself fade without noticing. But at the same time, there was comfort in her bluntness. It felt like someone finally saying out loud what I'd been whispering to myself in the dark. Still, a part of me squirmed, unsure if I was ready to accept the version of the truth she was offering. I looked around her living room, trying to ground myself. The faint scent of vanilla and cedarwood from her diffuser wrapped around me, a smell I'd always associated with safety. I clasped my hands together to stop them from trembling, but it didn't help much. I told her I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, if grief or fear were clouding my judgment. Rose shook her head and said I deserved peace, not doubt. And though her words were meant to empower me, there was something in her eyes, something fleeting, that left a tiny ripple of unease in my chest. When Rose told me I needed to leave Aaron for my own sanity, the words landed heavier than I expected. They echoed in the living room, bouncing off the framed photos and soft cushions like some kind of final verdict. I stared at her, unsure whether I felt comforted or judged. A part of me wanted to defend my marriage, to insist that Aaron wasn't cruel, just different. But the truth was, I didn't recognize myself anymore. I'd become a woman tiptoeing around her own home, waiting for scraps of affection, and admitting that burned more than I wanted to show. Rose leaned in, squeezing my hand, telling me I deserved better, that love wasn't supposed to make me feel this hollow. Her voice had that familiar conviction, the one that always made me feel protected. But this time, something about it stirred a twist low in my stomach. Still, I let her words wash over me, because I needed someone to tell me I mattered. I felt the warmth of her living room, heard the soft hum of her diffuser, and tried to anchor myself. Yet the more I spoke, the more vulnerable I felt, like peeling back layers I'd kept hidden even from myself. When I finally stood to leave, I was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, like I had poured everything onto her floor. I hugged Rose tightly, grateful for her presence, for her certainty. She held me a second longer than expected, whispering that she was always there for me. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. As I walked to my car, the cool air brushed against my damp cheeks, grounding me in a strange new resolve. I didn't know what came next, but something inside me had shifted. I just didn't realize yet that my search for answers was about to lead me somewhere I never imagined. A few days passed, and I tried to pretend life was normal again, even though nothing inside me felt normal. Then one night, Aaron came home later than usual, later than any excuse could reasonably cover. I heard the front door click shut, and immediately, something in the air felt different. When he walked past me, the scent hit me so sharply it stopped my breath for a second. Vanilla. Cedarwood. Warm, sweet, unmistakable. It wrapped around him like a whisper I knew too well. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, as if trying to warn me of something I wasn't ready to face. I tried to steady myself before speaking, but my voice still shook when I asked where he had been. He laughed lightly, brushing it off with some lousy excuse about office spills, like I was too naive to know the difference between a stranger's perfume and a familiar home scent. The moment he said it, something inside me snapped to attention, because that fragrance wasn't just familiar, it was Rose's. Her diffuser had filled her living room with that exact combination for years. Suddenly, every memory in her house, every conversation on that couch, flooded my mind with a sting that tasted like betrayal. I stood there staring at him, feeling my pulse pounding in my ears, my thoughts twisted together, confusion, denial, disbelief. No, it couldn't be. Not her. Not the friend who held me while I cried over him. But my body reacted before my mind caught up. A cold wave crept down my spine, settling like ice in my stomach. I watched Aaron walk away as if nothing was wrong, while that scent clung to him like a confession he didn't have the courage to speak. And in that moment, something told me the truth was closer and crueler than anything I had imagined. I walked into the kitchen just to steady myself, placing both hands on the counter so I wouldn't shake. The scent was still in the air, light, lingering, unmistakably hers. My mind kept trying to rationalize it, reaching for any explanation that didn't involve the two people I trusted most. Maybe he passed by someone. Maybe Rose changed her fragrance. Maybe I was imagining things because fear was already living inside me. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. My instincts had never screamed this loudly without reason. And that night, they were practically begging me to open my eyes. As I filled a glass of water, memories of that afternoon with Rose replayed in my head. Her pulling me close, telling me I deserved better, her voice trembling just enough to seem emotional. For the first time, I noticed something else in those moments, something subtle I hadn't been able to name back then. A flicker of guilt, a shadow crossing her expression too quickly for me to catch. The realization made my throat tighten. I felt foolish, exposed, like I had handed her my pain and she had hidden hers in plain sight. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the whole room could hear it. Aaron walked into the hallway humming softly, completely oblivious to the chaos unraveling inside me. I watched him from a distance, studying his every move. His easy stride, the relaxed swing of his arms, the way he checked his phone with a half smile. None of it matched a man stressed about work. None of it matched someone who feared being caught. And that scared me even more. Because people only act that comfortably when they believe the truth is so well hidden it will never surface. Something deep inside me shifted then, firm and resolute. I knew I couldn't just sit with suspicion anymore. I needed answers. That night, I barely slept. I kept turning from one side of the bed to the other, listening to Aaron's calm, steady breathing, while my own chest felt tight and restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rose's living room. I smelled that same warm vanilla and cedarwood wrapping around me. And then I saw Aaron walking through her doorway instead of mine. The images felt so vivid, so intrusive, that I had to sit up just to catch my breath. I hated my own mind for showing me things I wasn't yet prepared to believe, but the fear felt too real to ignore. By morning, I was exhausted, but strangely clear. Something inside me had shifted overnight, like survival instinct waking up after too long a sleep. I moved around the kitchen quietly, avoiding Aaron's eyes, observing him the way someone observes a puzzle they're close to solving. How casually he poured his coffee. How effortlessly he kissed my cheek. How confidently he said he had another late shift ahead. Each gesture felt like a performance now, a rehearsed routine meant to keep me tame and unquestioning. But I wasn't the same woman I had been even a week ago, not after smelling the truth on him. As he left for work, I stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the street. A mix of dread and determination coiled inside me, twisting tighter with every passing second. I didn't want to spy. I didn't want to doubt. I didn't want any of this. but sometimes a woman's heart knows long before her mind catches up. And mine was practically pounding out its own warning. I pressed my fingertips to the glass, feeling the cool morning air leaking through the edges, and I knew something unmistakable. The next time I went looking for answers, I wouldn't be unprepared, and I wouldn't be alone with my suspicions anymore. The next day, something inside me snapped into focus. I couldn't keep living in guesses and half-truths, not when the ache in my chest felt sharper than anything I'd ever known. So while Aaron headed out for another one of his mysterious overtime shifts, I grabbed my keys with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I didn't have a plan. I just had a destination, Rose's neighborhood. As I drove, my heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to push me toward the truth I'd been too afraid to face. The closer I got, the colder my hands became. Fear and certainty were merging in a way that made my stomach twist. I parked a few houses away, far enough not to draw attention, but close enough to see everything. The street was painfully quiet, no kids playing outside, no dogs barking, just this stillness that made my pulse sound even louder in my ears. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, watching Rose's front door like it held the answer to my entire life. Minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. My breath fogged the windshield, and I wiped it away with the back of my hand, telling myself I was being dramatic. But deep down, I knew I wasn't here for nothing. Something had led me to this exact place. Then, like a scene unfolding in slow motion, I saw him. Aaron, casual, comfortable, walking straight up Rose's driveway as if it were routine. He didn't even look around, didn't hesitate, didn't carry the tension of a man doing something wrong. He just opened her door and stepped inside like he belonged there. My mouth went dry. My whole body froze. It felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. I expected to cry or scream or crumble, but instead I went completely still. A terrifying kind of stillness, the kind you feel right before everything changes. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone when I picked it up. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew I needed to hear Rose's voice, needed to see how she would respond when she had no time to prepare. I pressed call, and the ringing felt endless, each beep slicing through the tightness in my chest. When she finally answered, her voice was strangely breathless, like she'd been caught off guard. I forced myself to sound panicked, desperate, anything that would compel her to open that door. And hearing her hesitation only made the truth feel sharper. Rebecca, now's really not a good time. Those words hit harder than any confession. Not a good time? For the woman she had held while I cried on her couch? For the friend she claimed she'd always protect? Something inside me cracked open then. Not just pain, but anger, fierce and trembling. I told her to open the door, my voice louder and rawer than I intended. I didn't care. I needed to see her face. I needed her lies to stop floating in the shadows. My heart was racing, pounding so loudly I felt it in my fingertips. And all I could think was, please don't let this be real. Please. When the door finally creaked open, I almost didn't recognize her. Rose stood there pale, nervous, her eyes flicking behind her like she was checking who could be seen. I stepped inside without waiting for permission, my pulse roaring in my ears. Her house, usually warm and inviting, suddenly felt cold, wrong, like the walls themselves were bracing for impact. I could feel her panic before she even spoke, this nervous energy radiating off her skin. And in that moment, her silence told me more truth than any explanation ever could. I didn't wait for Rose to gather her excuses. The fury in my chest was too hot, too wild, too betrayed to contain. My voice came out sharp, shaking, louder than I had ever heard myself before. I shouted at her, demanded to know how she could do this to me, how she could sit across from me while I poured my heart out, all the while hiding the very man who was breaking it. Rose tried to reach for me, her hands trembling, her lips quivering like she was searching for a story that might soften the blow. But every flicker of hesitation only made the betrayal feel deeper, heavier, more personal. Before I could press her further, I heard footsteps behind her. Slow, reluctant, familiar. Aaron stepped out from the hallway, and the sight of him standing in her home hit me with the force of a car crash. His hair was slightly messy, his shirt wrinkled, his expression frozen somewhere between guilt and cowardice. My stomach twisted so violently, I thought I might collapse. Hearing suspicion is one thing. Seeing proof standing right in front of you is another. My knees wobbled, but I forced myself to stay upright. I refused to give either of them the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. Aaron tried to speak, his voice soft, weak, dripping with excuses that sounded like empty shells before they even formed. "Becca, let me explain." But there was nothing left to explain. I felt something inside me go quiet, not broken, quiet. A cold, heavy stillness settled over me, replacing the shaking rage. I looked at both of them, two people I loved, trusted, confided in, and realized that whatever story they were about to spin, it didn't matter. They had already written the real one without me. And as I stood there in that doorway, I knew the next move I made would change everything. In that moment, standing in Rose's doorway with both of them frozen in front of me, something inside me crystallized. The shaking stopped. The tears retreated. My voice, when it finally came out, wasn't loud. It was controlled, almost eerily calm. I felt like I was watching myself from the outside, stepping into a version of me I had forgotten existed. A woman who once fought through loss, who built a life from nothing, who survived far worse than betrayal. I looked right at Aaron, then at Rose, and I felt the fire inside me shift into something colder, sharper, more powerful than anger. Aaron took one hesitant step toward me, reaching out like I was still the wife who would bend just to keep our peace. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze with a steady silence that made him drop his hand. Rose murmured my name softly, like saying it might somehow undo everything. But I didn't give either of them the chance. I told them it was over, whatever this twisted, hidden thing between them was. My voice didn't crack, not this time. And watching their faces fall, watching panic replace their false confidence, felt like reclaiming a part of myself they'd tried to bury. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Their eyes widened as soon as I unlocked it, as if they finally understood that I hadn't walked into that house unprepared. I opened the folder I'd created, the photos of Aaron entering her home, the screenshots contradicting every overtime he'd sworn was real, the bank charges that mapped a trail straight to Rose's address. Their lies were neatly organized, time-stamped, undeniable. I handed the phone to them, not because I needed their reaction, but because I wanted them to see exactly how thoroughly they had underestimated me. And as they stared, stunned and speechless, I felt the first real breath of freedom I'd taken in a long time. Watching their expressions shift was almost surreal. Aaron's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to gather the right lie, the one that might magically erase the evidence staring him in the face. Rose's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the kind that come from remorse. They were the panicked, scrambling kind, the ones people shed when the world they built on secrets starts collapsing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small in front of them. I felt steady, grounded, like I had finally stepped out of the fog they'd kept me in. Aaron tried to reach for me again, his voice cracking as he said my name, swearing it wasn't what it looked like. The irony almost made me laugh. I had spent weeks doubting my own intuition, questioning my sanity, trying to decipher the pieces of a puzzle they crafted behind my back. And now he wanted to rewrite the ending? No. I cut him off with a simple wave of my hand, a gesture so calm it made him go silent. I told him I didn't want excuses or explanations. I had all the truth I needed, and the truth was enough to shatter whatever was left between us. Rose finally managed to speak, reaching toward me with trembling fingers. She whispered apologies, begged me to understand, claimed it just happened, as if betrayal were an accident that slipped between two people like spilled wine. I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. Her tears didn't move me. Not after the nights I had spent in her living room, trusting her, leaning on her, sharing pieces of myself I never shared with anyone else. I stood there, watching them break under the weight of what they'd done, and I felt something unexpected, a new quiet strength rising in my chest, carrying me toward the next choice I already knew I had to make. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and told them exactly what I had already set in motion. The divorce papers were ready. The evidence was more than enough. Aaron wouldn't have the chance to twist the story or twist me anymore. I watched the color drain from his face as the reality settled in. The man who thought he could outsmart me had walked straight into his own downfall. And for once, the weight wasn't on my chest. It was on his. Rose sobbed harder, reaching for me again, whispering my name like it was a lifeline she suddenly wanted to hold on to. But I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel pity. I felt clarity. Sharp, cold, liberating. I told her that betraying a best friend doesn't come without consequences, that trust isn't something you get back with tears and shaky voices. She covered her face with her hands, and I stepped past her, every footstep feeling steadier than the last. It was strange. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It wasn't breaking. It was returning to me piece by piece. At the door, I paused long enough to look back at both of them, two people standing in the ruins of the lies they built together. I didn't need revenge in the dramatic sense. I didn't need shouting or chaos. My revenge was simple, elegant, devastating. I walked away. I left them with each other, the guilt, the mess, the future they had chosen behind my back. And as I stepped outside into the cool air, I felt something powerful rise inside me. Not just freedom, but the quiet, beautiful certainty that my story wasn't ending here. It was only beginning.